It started with a flicker in my vision. One moment I was staring at my dual monitors, reviewing a quarterly performance deck for the executive meeting, and the next, the text began to blur. I blinked, shook my head, tried to refocus. My right arm felt heavy, like it no longer belonged to me. I reached for my water bottle and missed it entirely, my hand slapping the desk instead. I remember thinking, this is strange. Before the sensation hit, an overwhelming wave of dizziness, the room tilting like I was on a ship. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled beneath me. Someone screamed. I was only vaguely aware of the commotion, chairs scraping, footsteps rushing, voices calling my name. I saw Lauren, our marketing analyst, drop her laptop as she sprinted toward me, her face pale with fear. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her I was fine, that I just needed a minute, but my mouth wouldn't cooperate. The words sat heavy in my throat, stuck behind a tongue that no longer moved the way it should. "Call 911!" someone yelled. The fluorescent lights above seemed to grow harsher, blinding as I was lowered to the floor. My chest felt tight, but not in a panicked way. It was like my body had quietly decided it had enough and was shutting down parts of me it no longer had the energy to maintain. The paramedics arrived fast, but everything was already dimming. I heard one of them ask if I had a history of seizures. Lauren answered shakily, "No, she's never even used a sick day." I was being lifted onto a stretcher when I saw him. Mark, our CEO, stood just beyond the crowd, arms folded, face unreadable. Not concern, not fear, just calculation. Like he was watching an unexpected delay in a presentation and mentally revising the agenda. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I swear I saw it. The flicker of inconvenience behind his otherwise blank expression. And then, everything went dark. The first thing I noticed was the sound, a soft rhythmic beep, steady as a metronome. My eyes opened to the muted beige of a hospital ceiling. For a moment, I didn't know where I was, or why my left hand felt like it belonged to someone else. Then it came back to me in pieces. The office, the fall, the voices, the stroke. The word carried weight now, heavier than it had in every medical pamphlet or afternoon PSA. Minor, the doctor said. Small, they clarified. But small didn't change the fact that my body had turned on itself while I was doing what I did best, working through lunch, prepping slides, and being the first one in and last one out. I'd spent the last 14 years building my career, one overachievement at a time. Promotions earned by skipping vacations, praise won by making myself indispensable. I was the person you gave the impossible deadline to because I'd deliver it, perfectly formatted, with a spare version just in case. My body had other ideas. The neurologist, a calm woman named Dr. Fletcher, explained that the stroke had affected a cluster of nerves responsible for motor control. Physical therapy would be necessary. I'd need time, real, uninterrupted time to recover. "You're not invincible," she said gently. "Whatever pressure you've been under, it's time to let some of it go. No job is worth this." I nodded because I knew she was right. But in the back of my mind, I was already thinking about the meetings I was missing, the emails piling up, the deck I hadn't finished. A nurse brought in my phone. No missed calls, one generic email from HR checking in, requesting that I forward any medical documentation for their records. No message from Mark. I tried to dismiss the unease crawling up my spine. Maybe he was busy. Maybe this wasn't personal. But the silence from my company, my work family, felt louder than any beeping monitor. I survived something that should have ended me. Now I had to decide what kind of life I was going back to, and whether it still had space for the version of me who finally knew her limits. The silence was deafening. I spent the first week of recovery in a haze. Hospital monitors, morning rounds, and the slow, frustrating process of reteaching my body how to move with purpose. But in the quieter moments when the nurses had stepped out and the therapists were gone, I waited. waited for the call, a card, a message, something. It never came. Not from Mark. Not from the vice president I mentored last year. Not even from Denise in HR, who used to send happy work-iversary gifts every year without fail. No flowers arrived. No company-wide "we're thinking of you" email. My phone, which once buzzed with non-stop pings and slacks, sat mute on the hospital nightstand like an artifact from another life. On day 8, I finally received an email. It wasn't from Mark. It wasn't even personalized. Just a standard HR form letter with the subject line, "Disability leave, required documentation." It opened with, "We hope you are recovering well," followed immediately by instructions to submit medical records, a timeline of expected return, and a reminder that failure to comply may affect eligibility for benefits. The tone was clinical, detached. It read more like a billing notice than an expression of concern for an employee who had nearly died in the office. I stared at the screen for a long time, rereading the phrase, "may affect eligibility." My chest tightened. Not from my condition, but from something far more familiar. Betrayal. After 14 years of loyalty, I'd become a liability overnight. I sent back the forms, filled out every checkbox, attached scanned documents with trembling fingers. I knew how this worked. I wasn't naive, but somewhere in the pit of my stomach, a quiet certainty began to settle. They weren't waiting for me to get better. They were waiting for me to disappear. I returned on a Wednesday, not full-time, just mornings with a staggered workload and light physical tasks, per my doctor's orders. HR had approved an accommodation plan that read like a compliance checklist. Ergonomic chair, flexible breaks, no standing meetings. It sounded generous, on paper. In practice, it felt like I was wearing a scarlet letter. Some colleagues greeted me warmly. Lauren hugged me in the hallway. Marcus from accounting brought me a smoothie on my first day back, but most of them offered cautious smiles, the kind you give someone returning from something unspeakable. They weren't sure what to say, or worse, they were sure they shouldn't say anything at all. And then there was Mark. I passed him twice that week. Both times he turned into another hallway before I reached him. Not a word, not a glance. Not even the tight-lipped smile he used to reserve for people whose names he'd forgotten. I half wondered if he was avoiding me out of guilt or fear that speaking to me would somehow make the situation real. In meetings, my name was skipped over during updates. Projects I'd led were now being run by others. When I asked Denise in HR about resuming a few of my former responsibilities, she deflected with, "We're just trying to support your healing, Erin." Support, right. I kept my head down, did the work, and left by noon, just like my plan required. But the walls felt colder now. The energy had shifted. Conversations quieted when I entered rooms. Slack channels where I'd once been tagged for input fell silent. I was back, but I wasn't really back. It wasn't just recovery they were watching. It was how long I'd last. It was a Friday when HR asked to check in. Denise greeted me with the same brittle smile she'd worn since my return, the kind that said this isn't personal before anything personal had even been said. She gestured toward a small conference room, one of the glass-walled ones at the far end of the floor that offered no privacy, only the illusion of transparency. Mark wasn't there, but I knew his fingerprints would be. "We just wanted to touch base on your reintegration," Denise began, sliding a printed performance review across the table. "There have been some concerns." I stared down at the paper. Bullet points, vague language, output below expectations, reduced client interaction, lack of proactive engagement. I looked up slowly. "Denise, I'm following the phased return plan, the one your department approved." "Yes," she said quickly, "and we appreciate that. This isn't punitive, Erin. It's just a trend we're noticing. Some of your colleagues feel you've lost a bit of your usual energy." My hands stayed folded, steady. "I had a stroke 5 weeks ago." She nodded but didn't look me in the eye. "Of course, and we're all so glad you're doing better. This is just about ensuring we're aligned on expectations moving forward. Aligned, as if I'd somehow misread the part where they said, "Take it slow." "Is this a formal warning?" I asked. No, just a conversation," she replied too quickly. "We want to help you succeed." But I'd heard this tone before. I'd used it myself early in my career when I was coached on how to let someone down gently. They weren't documenting concerns to support me. They were building a file. I left the meeting in silence, the printed feedback burning a hole in my bag. They weren't just waiting to see if I recovered. They were waiting to justify the moment I didn't. The break room was almost empty when I walked in, just the soft hiss of the espresso machine and the faint hum of gossip trailing from the hallway. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I just needed tea, something calming. But the voices floated in before I had the chance to make my presence known. "She's dead weight now," Mark was saying. My fingers froze mid-reach. "She's barely working half days, and we're still paying her full comp," he continued. I recognized the sharp-edged cadence of his voice, the one he used when talking to board members and investors, where every sentence sounded like a line item. "It's a liability." Another voice replied, low and male. "You can't just fire someone who had a stroke. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen." A pause. "That's why we're documenting," Mark said flatly. "She's not meeting expectations. HR has it under control." My breath caught. The tea bag slipped from my hand into the sink. I backed away slowly, heart pounding against my ribs like it wanted to punch through. I turned the corner and walked calmly, deliberately, down the hall, away from the break room, away from the sound of my name being reduced to a risk calculation. Not concern, not even resentment. Strategy. They weren't worried about me. They were eliminating me. And now I knew for certain it wasn't just discrimination. It was planned. They wanted a paper trail. Fine. So did I. After the break room conversation, something in me shifted. The haze of confusion, of trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, cleared completely. They weren't waiting for me to recover. They were building a case, quietly, strategically. I'd spent most of my career managing crises for other people. Now I had to manage my own. I began documenting everything, every Slack message, every vague email, every conversation with HR that included phrases like, "We just want to make sure you're supported," or "This isn't a formal warning, but..." I kept a private journal of my daily tasks, time-stamped. I took screenshots of calendars and to-do lists. When Denise brought up performance concerns again during our weekly check-in, I smiled and asked if she could provide a written outline of specific expectations and measurable goals for the next 30 days. "We don't want to make it too rigid," she replied. "Clarity helps me stay focused," I said, my voice smooth. They never sent anything. I asked again the following week. Still nothing. Meanwhile, small things began to shift. Project files reassigned without notice, meetings rescheduled without me, clients I had onboarded personally transferred to newer team members for continuity. It wasn't a restructure, it was an erasure. And every omission, every unexplained reassignment was now part of my file. They wanted a reason to say I'd failed. I was building proof that I hadn't. They scheduled it for 4:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. "Just a quick touch base," Denise had said, chipper and offhand, as if she were inviting me to a coffee chat. But I knew. The tone, the timing, the location. Conference room B, the same one they'd used to let go of 2 mid-level managers during budget cuts last year. When I walked in, Mark was already seated, arms folded, staring out the window. Denise sat beside him with a folder in front of her, her smile tight and rehearsed. "We appreciate your efforts over the past few months," she began, slipping into a voice that was too practiced to be genuine. "But after reviewing the current business needs, we've made the difficult decision to restructure your role." Restructure, the corporate euphemism for "you're done here." Denise opened the folder and slid a document toward me. This outlines your severance package. It includes 2 months' pay, extended health benefits through the end of the quarter, and a non-disparagement clause. We're happy to answer any questions you have." I picked up the paper, skimmed the dense legalese, and looked up at both of them. "May I have some time to review this before signing?" I asked, my voice perfectly even. Denise nodded quickly. "Of course. We recommend you consult a legal advisor." "Oh, I plan to," I said calmly. Mark shifted in his seat. Not a word, not even a glance. I wondered if he thought silence would insulate him from responsibility, from risk. But I already knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of mine. I met with the attorney the next morning. Her name was Julia Tran. Sharp eyes, sharper mind. Her office sat in a high-rise downtown, minimalist but deliberate. Every piece of art, every carefully chosen word made one thing clear. She knew how to make people listen. I laid out the situation in order. My return from medical leave, the performance concerns, the documentation they refused to provide, the severance package slid across the table with a smile. Then I handed over my folder. "Start here," I said, passing her the printouts, emails, and daily logs. "Everything's time-stamped. The rest is saved digitally, encrypted, backed up off-site." She flipped through the pages silently, pausing every few minutes to make a note. Her expression didn't change until she reached the transcript I'd typed out from the break room conversation. Mark's voice. "She's dead weight now. It's a liability." Her eyes narrowed. "You were fired less than 2 months after returning from medical leave," she said finally, voice low and measured. "And they documented performance issues without defining metrics or accommodations? That's not just sloppy." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. "This may be a textbook ADA violation," she continued. "Retaliation, failure to accommodate, wrongful termination, the works. And with this level of documentation?" She looked up. "We're not just talking settlement. This could get national." I didn't feel vindicated yet, not quite. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel cornered either. I felt ready. It didn't take long to find what we needed. Julia filed a request for discovery within days. The company's internal communications, Slack messages, and executive emails were subpoenaed as part of our legal strategy. I expected resistance. I didn't expect it to be so revealing. Buried in a string of emails between Mark and Denise, dated just 3 weeks after my stroke, was a subject line that said it all. Erin's return, contingency plan. The language was clinical. Cold. If she's not at full capacity within 30 days, we may need to escalate exit planning. The risk of keeping her outweighs the optics. But it was the final line that stopped me cold. One sentence buried in a reply-all thread, written by Mark. "Let's move fast before she pulls the disability card." Julia didn't blink. "This is the smoking gun," she said, highlighting the line and saving it to our case file. "They were already planning your removal, before any formal performance review, before they gave you a single documented expectation, all based on your medical condition." I sat in silence, my pulse slow and steady. They hadn't just underestimated me, they'd left fingerprints, and I was going to make sure everyone saw them. The lawsuit was filed on a Monday morning. Wrongful termination, discrimination, retaliation, violation of ADA protections. Each charge listed in calm, precise legal language, stripped of emotion but full of consequence. Julia handled the filing. I watched the email send confirmation with the same steadiness I'd used to survive every meeting, every dismissal, every carefully curated lie. The company responded exactly as we expected. Within 24 hours, their PR team released a vague, sanitized statement. "We take employee well-being seriously and are confident in our legal position." It was the corporate equivalent of a shrug. No apology, no accountability. Mark remained silent, publicly at least. Internally, I had no doubt he was scrambling. By Wednesday, I posted a message to my LinkedIn network. Not angry, not vengeful, just facts. In June, I had a stroke at my desk. I returned to work weeks later under a reduced doctor-approved schedule. 2 months after that, I was fired without performance documentation. After years of leadership and loyalty, I have filed suit to hold my former employer accountable. This isn't about revenge. It's about dignity. It's about ensuring no one else is treated like a risk for surviving. I hit publish and stepped away from my screen. By the end of the day, the post had 8,000 reactions, dozens of comments, messages from strangers, some in tech, some in healthcare, some who had also been restructured right after a diagnosis, a leave, a pregnancy. This wasn't just my story. It was something far bigger. By Friday, Business Insider called. They'd seen the LinkedIn post and wanted to run a feature, Fired for Surviving, when companies treat recovery as risk. Julia reviewed the questions, and I agreed to speak. On record, on the record. No rage, just the truth. The article dropped the following Monday. It detailed my career history, my medical emergency, the internal emails uncovered in discovery. It quoted ADA experts. It listed the pending suit. Most importantly, it named the company and Mark as central to a growing conversation about workplace retaliation. That same afternoon, I got a message from an old colleague. They're panicking. The board had an emergency meeting. Someone pulled old HR files. By Wednesday, rumors were swirling. Mark's past complaints, long buried, never escalated, began surfacing. Anonymous sources leaked a pattern of quiet exits. Women returning from maternity leave, older employees with recent diagnoses, a manager who'd filed a stress leave request and never came back. It was no longer about one stroke. It was a culture, and now the world was watching. The offer came through Julia's office, unsigned, unacknowledged, and very clearly a plea to make everything disappear. 6 months' salary, full NDA, no admission of wrongdoing. In exchange for a full release of claims, both parties agree to refrain from public commentary. Translation: take the money, stay quiet, and let them rewrite the ending. I didn't respond right away. I let Julia read the room, read the language, read the fear behind the legalese. She looked up from the offer, unimpressed. "They think they can bury this," she said simply. I nodded once. "Then let's dig deeper." Julia drafted our counter-proposal with surgical precision. No grandstanding, no theatrics, just facts backed by leverage. Public apology. Not vague, not passive. My name, my story, in their own words. Policy reform, including mandatory training, ADA compliance audits, and a third-party HR review. A reinstatement offer, on paper, publicly, even though I had no intention of ever going back. And a payout that reflected not just the salary I'd lost, but the clients I'd built, the time I'd invested, the credibility they tried to erase. We submitted it at noon on a Thursday. By the following Monday, they folded. The press release went out on a Tuesday. We acknowledged that mistakes were made in our handling of an employee's medical recovery and subsequent termination. We regret that our internal processes did not reflect our stated values of inclusion, accessibility, and care. We are committing to immediate reforms and ongoing accountability. My name was included. So was the term wrongful termination, a phrase they had fought to avoid until public pressure forced their hand. Mark's name was not in the release, but by Thursday it was confirmed he had stepped down to pursue other opportunities. The board moved quickly, clearly eager to cauterize the wound. An interim CEO was installed. An internal memo was leaked announcing a company-wide ADA compliance initiative and a third-party audit of all post-leave employment decisions over the past 5 years. I didn't celebrate, not exactly. But when the inbox began to fill with messages from former colleagues, industry contacts, even strangers, thanking me for not signing that NDA, I felt something close to peace. They tried to write me off as a liability. Instead, I rewrote the story as a warning. And they knew it. 1 year to the day. The stage lights were softer than I expected, but the room was full. Executives, HR leaders, DEI officers, and early career professionals scribbling notes on tablets. The National Workplace Inclusion Summit had flown me out, comped the hotel, and listed me as a keynote speaker on every program handed out at check-in. I stood behind the podium, adjusted the mic, and took a breath. No trembling, no fear, just focus. "Thank you," I began, scanning the rows of attentive faces. 12 months ago, I was terminated 2 months after surviving a stroke at my desk. I'd returned to work under doctor-approved accommodations. I followed every instruction, and still I was let go, quietly, strategically. There were no gasps, no need for drama. Most people in the room already knew the story. Some had followed the lawsuit. A few had reached out privately, their own versions of the same narrative still fresh, still unresolved. "What happened to me wasn't unique," I continued. "It was just unusually well documented." A soft ripple of knowing laughter passed through the crowd. Today, I wasn't a plaintiff. I wasn't an ex-employee. I was a consultant, brought in by organizations finally ready to take inclusion seriously. Not as a buzzword, but as a structure. Since the case settled, I'd worked with 7 companies across 4 industries, helping them redesign leave reintegration protocols, retrain managers, and build systems that didn't just tolerate human limits, but planned for them. After the lawsuit, my former employer had done everything they could to rehabilitate their image, but the industry had seen behind the curtain. Their name was now cited in DEI presentations as a cautionary tale. And mine, more than once, had been cited as a benchmark for resilience and reform. I wrapped up the case study section of my talk and closed my notes. "Recovery isn't weakness," I said, steady and clear. "Accommodation isn't a burden, and no one should be treated as expendable for surviving what life throws at them." I paused, letting the moment settle. Having a stroke didn't end my career, but failing to value people nearly ended theirs. The audience rose slowly. The applause was real, not performative, not polite, earned. I stepped away from the podium with calm, quiet purpose. Not broken, not erased, redefined.